I'm Eric Parker. This morning on our very first edition of CT22. It's going to be a big year in politics with lots of local races to watch. They include Governor Lamont's bid for a second term, to who may run against Senator Richard Blumenthal, to the 5th congressional district race, the seat now held by Jahana Hayes, a race many media outlets are calling one to watch nationally. COVID, of course, dominated the news in 2021. So what will the news headlines be in 22? We'll get insight into what we'll likely be talking about in the new year. We'll also talk some sports headlines. The UConn women's basketball team finds itself in a very different position in the new year with the injury to a key player. The men started the season in the top 25, and UConn football will start the 22 season with a new coach. Plus, we'll take a look at some fascinating trends of the future with futurist Faith Popcorn. She has some interesting thoughts on how lives around the world will change in the coming year and beyond. It's all ahead this Sunday, January 2nd. CT22 starts right now.
From WFSB, this is CT22 with Eric Parker, sponsored by Hartford Healthcare.
Good morning and Happy New Year. Our focus today is on the future. What is coming our way in 2022? It'll be a big year in politics here in Connecticut, that's for sure. Channel 3's chief political reporter, Susan Raff, and the Hartford Courant's Capitol Bureau Chief, Chris Keating, are both joining us this morning. Chris, thanks for being with us. Susan, I want to start with you. Talk about the race for governor. Governor Lamont's running again. He made that announcement very early. So what do we expect as we head towards Election Day?
Well, it's interesting because he made the announcement. He said he wasn't sure if he wanted to run. And then the very next day, he said, yes, I'm in. It's hard to believe 3 years has gone by. I think COVID is still very much here. And that's going to be an issue, certainly, in this campaign for him. And we're going to have to wait and see. Right now, Themis Klarides, the minority leader, she is officially in. The interesting thing about her, we haven't heard much from her. She has declared candidacy, but she has not filed a committee, which means she may decide to fund her own campaign. And then there's Bob Stefanowski, who we've seen very much of, certainly during the pandemic, giving out masks.
A very close race last time, Stefanowski against Lamont. It would be interesting to see if there were a sequel.
Right. And I think, again, COVID is going to be an issue in this race. Maybe Stefanowski or the other Republicans will say that he hasn't done a good job, that he has overstepped his bounds. He had 6 extensions for executive orders. But also, I think what Bob Stefanowski might do is really bring home juvenile crime and the issue that many communities are now facing. And that's something that Governor Lamont needs to pay attention to.
All right, Chris Keating, I want to ask you, as we look into 2022, there was so much made back in the fall of 21 about gains made at municipal races by Republicans in Connecticut. Do you see that as being anything that foretells the future here in 22?
Well, I think the Republicans think they have some momentum. There's no question about that. They can gain a certain number of seats, but the momentum in a very, very close race can push you over the top. So you'd rather have the momentum on your side than not. By that, I also mean the midterms, the congressional elections. Republicans think they have momentum at the national level as well as the state level. On the flip side, if you don't run a good campaign, that doesn't mean you're going to win your race. So the momentum generally helps around the edges. It helps on the tight races, but it definitely can help push you over the goalpost.
One of the races nationally people are talking about a lot is Jahana Hayes in the 5th district. They're saying that that's one to watch from a national Republican standpoint. Chris, do you think that that's really a race that is going to be a hot one here in Connecticut when it actually comes time to walk into the voting booth?
Well, it definitely has the potential. The Democrats have had that seat for about 15 years now. If you go back historically, the Republicans did have that seat. The whole Western Connecticut seat before the redistricting. In other words, the 5th congressional district, John Rowland had it, Gary Franks had it. So through the years, and then when it was merged, Nancy Johnson had it. Those are all Republicans. So that has changed, though, in the last 15 years after Chris Murphy won it. So Hayes has it now, and the Dems have had it for 15 years. But the Republicans think with a former senator named George Logan that this is their best shot in recent years.
Susan, we said George Logan was on our show months ago. I can't remember when he was on the show to say he was going to run against Jahana Hayes, getting his name out there early. What do you make of his candidacy?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say he's a darn good guitarist. He played at Nedstock or Woodstock, but all kidding aside, I think he is a strong candidate. He lost a recount for his seat, but he is very well liked. I think what Chris Keating pointed out too is that some thought that Jahana Hayes was a bit vulnerable. Democrats will say that's not the case now. They think she's going to win again. But George Logan, he's one of those Republicans. He's a moderate. He's not an extremist. He seems to, get along well, certainly when he was in the state legislature. And I do think he's a strong candidate. There were some issues with whether he still lived in the district, but he's not running for Senate anymore. He's running for Congress. And that map still hasn't been drawn yet. But I don't think that's going to be an issue. But I think he's a strong candidate.
You and I talked, Susan, at the end of the legislative session when we had, majority Democrat legislature, a Democratic governor, and they couldn't see eye to eye on a lot of the big issues, particularly budget issues. Do you see that being a big story going into 22, that all one party and they just can't figure out what they want?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think people look back and say that the bipartisan agreement that they did without Governor Malloy was probably the most productive session ever, right? So I think people want to see both sides together craft out something. And what you have now is very split and kind of divisive, I think, because they feel, certainly with the Democrats in power and giving the governor so much carte blanche over and over again, it shuts them out. And I think that's going to annoy a lot of Republicans. I know Bob Stefanowski feels that way, and some of the other Republicans feel that, the state is too far to the left and not in the middle, and government has too far of a reach.
Chris, it's a short session this year up in Hartford. What do you expect from the legislature as we head into 22?
Well, the primary focus will be on the budget adjustments, but you are correct. It's a 3-month session. A lot of the difficult stuff was already passed. By that, I mean marijuana, sports betting, online gambling, all of that had been around for about 5 years or more, and that is done. So it will depend, if more COVID flares up, the governor's powers are extended until February, but they expire around February 15th. So one of the first things the legislature will have to do will be to fight over whether to extend Lamont's powers. That'll be the first thing out of the box, maybe even on opening day, to see what they will do. And that all depends on these different variants and things of that nature. I think no one has wanted to continue extending Lamont's powers, but it keeps happening and happening and happening. And COVID has been with us a lot longer than anyone had hoped.
Certainly, that will certainly be in the news in 22. Susan, you mentioned earlier talking about the juvenile crime as being something Republicans are going to keep pushing. Do you foresee any action on that in 22?
I think Democrats are going to have to do something to kind of address that. What they do remains to be seen. They tried to make, they did do an effort last year. It wasn't a legislative, or this year, not a legislative fix, but it allowed the probation department, it gave them greater access. So instead of, a lot of times when someone's arrested, it's not Monday through Friday, it's a Saturday or Sunday, and the police couldn't get access to records. So there was an agreement with judicial, hey, we'll make someone available so you can get those records. But I think it is a big issue. I really do. And I think that Democrats are going to have to either have GPS monitoring or other things to try to hold especially repeat offenders more accountable.
All right. Well, we'll be watching. We'll be reading Chris. We'll be watching Susan and seeing what's going to happen in 22. Thank you both for being with us here on CT 22.